Who are the absolutely dumbest Sith in all of Star Wars lore? Greetings, wise acolytes of the Force, and welcome back to our archives. In the halls of our great library, we have paid homage to many of the greatest and most intelligent Sith Lords that have ever lived. Legends such as Marka Ragnos, who was perhaps the only Sith Lord to have full loyalty from his empire, or visionaries like Darth Bane, who entirely reformed the Sith in a vision that he believed in and the Sith as we know it. In the Baneite lineage, we also get genius mad scientists such as Darth Plagueis, who unlock the secrets of life and death, causing the Force to flee from him in disgust. Many of these dark side adepts have earned their place in the pages of galactic history, and in many ranked lists in these archives. However, not all of these Sith were created equal, and though many of them have left marks of glory or terror on the galaxy, there were some Sith Lords that simply fell short. You can't have the best without there being the mediocre, and you can't have the wise without the foolish. And today, we'll look at the lesser. While many Sith have had our mouths agape in stunning awe of their intelligence and power, today though, we are rather going to take a look at Sith that had our eyes squinted in confusion at their mere incompetence. Yes, my friends, for this holocron, we are going to be ranking the top 5 dumbest Sith Lords to have ever come from the Order. The absolute pitiful of the pitiful. First though, let's make something clear. Our selections for this list were made on a basis of them either making unwise decisions with disastrous consequences, or just having a regular lack of intelligence. But before we begin, we have sensed that you are nowhere near as unwise or unintelligent as the men and Sith on this list. So reach out with the Force and crush that subscribe button so that you may increase your knowledge all the more with our daily holocron openings. Now acolytes, let us begin. To kick us off with a bang, we have the Sith Lord Darth Millennial. Darth Millennial is one that not many would recognize upon first hearing the name. Millennial would be the 4th generation of the Baneite lineage, a relatively early time in the era of the Rule of Two. Millennial was the apprentice of the Sith Lady Darth Cognis, who had been trained directly by Zana, the direct apprentice of Darth Bane himself. Cognis had actually met Bane when he was alive, and grew to respect him immensely. As such, she was an absolute zealot for the philosophy of the Rule of Two. Of course, there is some debate as to whether or not Cognis was trained under Zana or Bane, as it is left to interpretation by the reader in the novels. However, what is clear is that Darth Zana definitely completed the training of Cognis. However, this would also mean that Cognis would have a direct teaching about the Rule of Two from the very man who created it, making her zealous loyalty to the idea all the stronger. Darth Cognis was intelligent and had a gift of foresight, able to see effortlessly into the future, a rare gift. She knew that the Rule of Two would indeed succeed by her visions, which is why it was so difficult to understand why her first apprentice turned out the way that he did. Darth Millennial was a mutated human whose mutation apparently was just that he had 3 eyes. Despite being trained by the loyal Darth Cognis, Darth Millennial disagreed with the philosophy of the Rule of Two and insisted that it would be prudent to do it the old way of the old Sith, by building up an army of Dark Lords to challenge the Jedi, completely missing the point of the Rule of Two. We aren't necessarily trying to bash Darth Millennial for just having his own ideas, but when we explain why we think these ideas are in fact stupid ones, perhaps you'll see our reasoning. Based on what we know of his age, Darth Millennial would have grown up during the latter years of the New Sith Wars, so he would have been around for the very end of the 7th Battle of Ruusan. At this time, the entire galaxy was pretty much worn out with the Jedi's fight against the Sith, as it has happened to be a constant thing, literally without any break for 1,000 years at this point in time. Even the Jedi Order itself was done with it, and General Hoth's Army of Light was suffering from lack of recruits, due to the fact that the Jedi Order as a whole was tired of the constant fighting, which was starting to look pretty pointless at this point. The Bane novels make it very clear what the War of Light and Darkness looked like from the rest of the galaxy's perspective. Yes, the Sith were bad, but the Republic and the Jedi were starting to look just like them with all of their warmongering. The lines between the Sith and the Jedi were beginning to blur, as the Sith had pretty much started just to operate the same way that their enemies did. It didn't matter how many Sith foot soldiers they had or that had to die, the Jedi could match them, and it was clear that the war was an exasperated stalemate. And if the Sith continued on this path, they would most certainly be obliterated from the star maps. If not for the Rule of Two, this would have been the fate of the Sith, and now it was the only option. For thousands of years prior, the Sith rose up with big armies and could not defeat the Jedi. I mean, not even the Sith Empire at their most powerful under Darth Vitiat's rule could defeat the Jedi Order. That plan just would not work. Anyone with eyes at this point would have seen that. Darth Millennial had 3 eyes and apparently still missed the memo. He insisted that an army of Sith would be more beneficial, despite the thousands of years of evidence to the contrary. The Sith right now were weaker, and for once, they were wise enough to acknowledge it. If they went public again, then that would mean a swift and decisive end. Millennial should have known this, and even if he did not, he should have at the very least trusted in Cognus's ability to literally see into the future. But no, Millennial remained stubborn in his ways, and so his master, in a fit of fury, attempted to kill him. Millennial, however, managed to escape her, and he hid in the unknown regions, deciding to move forward with his idea of starting a dark side army. He founded what is known as the Prophets of the Dark Side, which were not much of an army at all, but more of a church group that would live on for 1,000 years, but still ultimately accomplished close to nothing, and being wiped out by Darth Sidious, the culmination of the Rule of Two, in a final ironic move. Moving on, we have Lord Khan. Speaking of poor decisions, let's talk about the entire reason for the Rule of Two. We're looking directly at Lord Khan and his Brotherhood of Darkness. Some might be surprised that we included a man like this on our list, as he was actually seen as a genius and a visionary in his era, at least in the eyes of the Sith underlings who thought his way was the only way. Perhaps it might have been if they were trying to keep the Sith Empire going on. However, Darth Bane already points out all of the flaws in Lord Khan's ideology, which was his attempt to bring all the Sith under one banner by declaring each Sith Lord equal to one another. This was to stop all the backstabbing and infighting that made the Order weak. At first, the Brotherhood of Darkness proved to be an absolute powerhouse, and it was actually truthfully effective for a time. But what Lord Khan didn't see coming was the fact that during the Battle of Ruusan, the Sith Order had become nothing more than a twisted parody of the Jedi, and due to the stresses of war, Lord Khan began to slowly lose his mind. Now, we haven't placed Lord Khan on this list because of his flawed ideology, as that wouldn't exactly be fair, especially when comparing him to Millennial. He did what he thought was the only logical next step. It is too much to say that he should have known that this was the error in his ways, as this in itself doesn't prove that he's one of the dumbest Dark Lords. The reason though that we have placed Lord Khan on this list was because of his terrible leadership and his pitiful battle strategy. The Brotherhood of Darkness might have worked if they had put literally anyone else in charge of all of the military decision making. We find out later in the Bane novels that Lord Khan was able to keep the peace not because of his charisma, but because of his ability to manipulate even Lords of the Sith with a rare Force ability. We find out that he has been using all of his talents to basically mind trick all of the Sith Lords into playing nice with one another, and he had been doing so subtly enough to keep them from noticing. He had tried to use this trick on Darth Bane himself, but failed due to the fact that Bane was much stronger in the mind and in the Force than the common Sith was. In fact, Bane managed to deceive Khan into believing that Bane had been successfully mind controlled, leading to him being able to stab Khan in the back. Not literally though, Bane merely used Khan's extremely poor planning against him. The war between the Army of the Light and the Brotherhood of Darkness was a constant wrestling match. Unlike most wars, this wasn't galactic-wide, but focused only on a few specific systems. The war was a much lesser scale, which is why there was only a certain portion of the Jedi Order that actually joined the Army of the Light, rather than the entire Order itself. The way the war ended up shaking out was that it was all going to come to a head during the Ruusan campaign. Lord Khan had placed all of his chips on this campaign, as it all came down to this since both the Army of Light and the Brotherhood of Darkness intended to finish the war right there. What resulted was an extremely savage and messy 2-year skirmish, which led to multiple stalemates in the fighting. Lord Khan had no backup plan, and it was either they won Ruusan and crushed the Army of the Light, or they were destroyed entirely, and they were quickly running out of supplies, as the amount of planets they controlled at this point was significantly less than the Jedi did, because of course they had Republic backing. At some point during the Ruusan campaign, Lord Khan set up a blockade around the planet to keep the Republic from gaining supplies and fresh troops. The fleets above the planet were at a stalemate, just like the ground forces war. The Republic had fresh supplies waiting to be given, but they were held back by this blockade. The Sith had nothing though. The reinforcements from the Sith Lord Academy of Korriban was their final hope. This exact blockade was the only thing keeping the war going at this point. Everything rode on the blockade. Lord Khan had single-handedly put the entire Sith Order in an unwinnable checkmate. With that said though, they were also close to destroying the Army of Light. but all that had to happen was if the blockade was broken, and of course it would be, then the Sith would be destroyed. Khan foolishly left Bane, a known traitor, behind in camp completely unsupervised. Bane gave false orders to the blockade to engage the Republic fleet, and this gave a good enough window for the Jedi to send their ground troops fresh supplies. Basically an act that ended the war. Lord Khan allowed himself to completely lose his mind in fear and desperation, and positioned himself to be perfectly manipulated into detonating a new weapon that Bane created. That was the Thought Bomb, thus destroying the entire Sith Order itself, save for one. That man was Darth Bane. Moving on, we know what will be a rather controversial pick, but that is Savage Opress, actually one of my personal favorite Star Wars characters. It's understandable if some of you think this pick is a little unfair, especially in conjunction with the rest of these Sith who had made some pretty major mistakes. But we all have to call a spade and say that Savage certainly falls short in the intelligence category. He doesn't do anything super incompetent, to be fair, but it's clear that he just simply never would have made it on his own. Savage grew up in a village in the middle of nowhere, and was just sort of taken by the Night Sisters because he happened to be strong enough. Using a dark ritual, they mutated him into a stack of muscles that could be molded to anyone's use. Savage Opress is very powerful, sure, but he's simply just a meathead. Savage Opress would be transported to the apprenticeship of Count Dooku, and no matter how much training or torture Darth Tyrannus subjected him to, Savage just never seemed to grasp his lessons. His saber skill was pretty lacking, though he at least made up for it with his brute strength. He was able to break free of Ventress's mind control, but he only knew to go back to where he came from. He would receive the quest from Mother Talzin to find his brother and Maul, but Savage is hardly able to do this quest without a glowing necklace. And as soon as that necklace stopped working, he just sort of flipped out and went on a monstrous rampage. Even after finding Maul and becoming his apprentice, he didn't have any greater shows of ambition and just followed Maul around, doing his bidding. It all comes down to the fact that Savage never really seems to have any goals for himself, and doesn't care to pursue or even create any greater prospects than just to serve a greater power. It's clear that he would never made it on his own as a Sith Lord, and it seems as though he can only ever fit the role of being in servitude. And all of this is even admitted by Savage himself. Even on his deathbed, he admits to his brother Maul that he isn't like him, and never was, basically confessing to not really even expecting much from himself in the first place. A powerful wielder of the dark side, to be sure, but I do not believe that anyone would call Savage Opress wise. Moving on, we have Darth Gravid. Now let's talk again about the Sith that made huge mistakes which forever impacted their order. To do this, we'll have to roll back the clock into somewhere in the very middle of the Rule of Two in order to talk about the infamous Darth Gravid, a Sith Lord which pretty much everyone agrees was pretty dumb. Gravid was a man who had wise prospects, but went about it very unwisely. He wanted to find the balance in the Force, but wanted to do so in the most bizarre way possible. Gravid became obsessed with Jedi lore and teachings, soon desiring to implement their ways of compassion and altruism into the Sith philosophy, which seems whack in the first place. But of course, this can never work, as he only wanted to do this to obtain more power, leading into the fact that you can't be selfless for selfish reasons. Some might say this would just be hypocritical, but when it comes to the Force, this is downright madness. And eventually, he would succumb to this madness, as he couldn't effectively reason out the dichotomy of the Jedi and Sith lore, especially when he actively tried to merge the two philosophies. Rather than just starting over, maybe looking at it from another angle, he decided that this was the only way to move on, and that the only way to do so further was to destroy everything the Sith Order had, and to essentially start over from scratch just like Bane had. He then began to systematically destroy or hide all the Sith lore that they had. All the precious scrolls, holocrons, ancient lightsabers, almost all of it gone, destroyed by this one man, all lost to this single madman. There's no telling what amazing pieces of knowledge that have been forever lost due to the incompetent madness of this single Sith. It was extremely lucky for the Sith Order that his apprentice stopped him, and at least managed to recover some of the lost lore that was destroyed or hidden away. Among all of the Sith that would follow him, Gravid was an embarrassment, but I personally am more shocked that our number one pick isn't placed as the real humiliator of the Sith Order. And finally, we have Naga Sadow. Don't be fooled by the legendary reputation behind the name. Naga Sadow is undoubtedly one of the worst Sith Lords to have ever lived, and we did an entire holocron on why he was such an embarrassing failure. But let's recap his mistakes as soon as he started the Great Hyperspace War, a war that would destroy the golden age of the Sith completely. Of all of the Sith on this list, undoubtedly Naga Sadow did the most damage. And it all began with the Great Hyperspace War. Sadow had pulled some masterful manipulation and brilliant schemes in order to climb his way to the top and get this war going. But as soon as the war started, it was like all his intelligent reasoning got jettisoned from an airlock. His first act of incompetence is when he left the individual known as Dav Daragon in charge of a fleet right at the flagship. Despite Gav having literally zero military combat experience whatsoever and only a rudimentary understanding of even the Force. As a refresher, Gav was one of the 2 pilots that had accidentally stumbled on the Sith homeworld of Korriban, which started this whole mess in the first place. Gav hadn't been fully turned over to the dark side yet though, but instead had just been training with Sadow for a maximum of maybe a few weeks. Not nearly enough time for him to have any sort of loyalty to the Sith or even Sadow. The second foolish thing he does is send this invasion force directly into the heart of the Republic by outright attacking Coruscant. No buildup, no plan of siege, or trying to maybe surround Coruscant first by taking out a few systems. Nope, he went right into the very cradle of the Republic's power. And this is the thing that Sadow throws the entire Sith fleet at in this invasion, leaving, you guessed it, the Sith homeworlds completely exposed and with no protection whatsoever. Although the first stages of the invasion were successful in catching the Republic completely off guard, everything would be turned on its head in a matter of hours. Gav's sister Jory was there on Coruscant and managed to talk Gav into renouncing the Sith and turning back to their side, which was obviously a massive surprise to Naga Sadow. It is absolutely ludicrous that Naga Sadow would allow a Republic sympathizer to lead his fleet into the invading Republic space without taking into account his emotional ties. Sadow took on the Sith apprentice that still had emotional attachments to a sister that Sadow let on continue living. Gav and Jory flew back to Naga Sadow's meditation sphere following this and disrupted his battle meditation, ultimately costing the entire Battle of Coruscant, and Naga Sadow lost the core of the Republic. Sadow tried to regroup back on Korriban, but most of his fleet had already been crushed by the power of the Republic. But guess what, Acolytes? It got worse. Sadow was caught in a battle on 2 fronts. On one side was an old rival of his, a Sith by the name of Ludo Kresh, and on the other was the Republic. Naga Sadow would be defeated by making the most ridiculous, easily avoidable mistakes, and thus ruining the golden age of the Sith, costing the Sith their entire homeworld and the entire empire. Not to mention wasting nearly 3,000 years of development or their entire race. And it appears as if no one really ever talks about this. The comics depict the Great Hyperspace War having only lasting a single day, but the novels play these events out over a much longer period of time, so it's up to you how long it really lasted. Nevertheless though, the Great Hyperspace War was a humiliating defeat for the Sith, and it falls squarely on the shoulders of Naga Sadow. When looking at the facts, there is no one to blame but Naga. We watch him pull off expertly crafted plans of espionage in order to gain positions as the Dark Lord, which let us know that he knows better than this. But these basic mistakes make us wonder whatever could have happened for Naga Sadow to be so stupid when he got the power he desired. The fact he knew better and did the opposite for me makes him the dumbest Sith Lord in all of the lore. Not to mention the consequences of his actions. So my friends and acolytes, I do hope that you enjoyed this holocron, and we want to know if you agree with our picks and the reasoning behind them. If you don't, we would love to hear why, and who you think is one of the dumbest Sith Lords in the Order that we failed to mention. Until next time, my friends, and very intelligent acolytes, may the Force be with you, and have a great day.